Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government who it consulted before producing the Supporting Transgender Pupils in Schools guidance for education authorities in schools, which it published yesterday.
Cabinet Secretary-General Goldruth.
Presiding Officer, the revised guidance has been developed to respond to and take account of recent legal decisions. There has been engagement with education authorities and trade unions to understand the concerns being experienced within our schools. The guidance which this revised guidance is based on was developed in light of engagement with a range of stakeholders, including parents and carers, education representatives, LGBT organisations and women's organisations. The Scottish Government has been taking forward the detailed work that is necessary as a consequence of the Supreme Court ruling. We remain committed to engaging with and involving partners and stakeholders throughout that process, as and when appropriate. But I want to take this opportunity to make absolutely clear that the rights of all children and young people must be respected in our schools. We have brought forward updates to the guidance to provide clarity and confidence to teachers and staff as they work to support the mental, physical and emotional health of transgender young people in our schools.
Pam Gosal.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary. Yesterday, the SNP Government published new guidance that was meant to give schools clarity about how boys and girls toilets and changing rooms facilities should be provided. Yet, instead of finally protecting single-sex spaces, the SNP's muddled new guidance has confused matters further. This morning, the SNP Education Secretary repeatedly refused to state whether biological males could still use girls' toilets and changing rooms in our schools. Therefore, let me give the Cabinet Secretary the opportunity to answer a simple question on yes or no. Can biological males who identify as women still use girls' toilets under this guidance?
Cabinet Secretary.
I thank the member for her question. And it's important to say that we have been clear since the Supreme Court ruling that we accept the judgment in relation to the judgment on biological sex. And I also want to put on the record that, of course, under the 1967 regulations, our schools are already provided for in terms of toilets being provided for both boys and girls. That is stipulated in legislation at the current time. There is also a requirement in relation to accessible toilets more broadly. But I do think more broadly, as I alluded to in my previous response, Presiding Officer, the rights of all children and young people must be respected in our schools. It's also important to remember that transgender people represent 0.44% of the whole population in Scotland. And evidence also tells us that transgender young people have significantly worse educational and well-being outcomes than other pupils. They are much more at risk of bullying and they are more likely to leave education early and are at risk of increased mental health and well-being concerns. We have updated the guidance in accordance with the Supreme Court ruling and, of course, I've responded to the member's point in relation to the law and the stipulation in relation to the point the member has raised in terms of single-sex spaces.
Cabinet Secretary, all I needed was a yes or no, but obviously I didn't get that. What is even more disturbing about this guidance is who has helped develop it. The guidance boasts that it was developed by LGBT Youth Scotland. This taxpayer-funded lobbying group previously produced guidance that suggested there was no such thing as biological sex. It was widely criticised by child health experts, including one who said the guidance simply should not be accessible to our school children. So, Cabinet Secretary, why on earth is this SNP government still taking its cue from an extreme gender ideology lobbying group instead of the Supreme Court?
Cabinet Secretary.
I thank the member for her question. I think she is somewhat misguided in relation to the point she'd made about stakeholder engagement. I'd be very clear that we've engaged throughout the course of the months that have passed since the Supreme Court ruling, with trade unions in particular, to hear from them about their members' experiences, and with COSLA directly. But in terms of the engagement we've had with stakeholders, that engagement has included the Association of Directors of Education in Scotland. I hope the member doesn't have an issue with us engaging with ADES, the COSLA, who I've already alluded to, Education Scotland, Engender, LGBTU Scotland, the National Parent Forum of Scotland, Rape Crisis Scotland, Sports Scotland, Stonewall Scotland, and the Scottish Transgender Alliance. So that is a list of the organisations that were engaged with back in 2021. The update that I provided for yesterday is a technical change and it relates directly to, of course, recent legal changes that have come forward. We have updated the guidance in accordance with those legal changes.
Thank you. I have a large number of colleagues who want to ask supplementary questions. It's unlikely I'm going to get through all of them, but I'm going to require brevity both in the questions and the responses. First, Paul McLennan.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Ensuring support for transgender children in Scotland schools is absolutely vital to their well-being and learning experience. Can the Cabinet Secretary speak further on how this guidance will contribute to this objective?
Cabinet Secretary.
Raising a very important point, and as I have already alluded to, Presiding Officer, the rights of all children and young people must be respected in our schools. I've spent a number of meetings now engaging with our trade unions, listening to COSLA about members' feedback, about teachers' feedback from what is happening in our schools. And I again want to put on the record, Presiding Officer, that we are talking about a very small percentage of Scotland's pupil population at the current time. But it is important that the Government updates our guidance in relation to the Supreme Court ruling. It's absolutely right, of course, that schools play their part, along with others, to help ensure that those young people who are feeling particularly vulnerable at the current time are supported. And the guidance goes a long way to helping provide for that.
Pam Duncan-Glancy.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. The Scottish Government's guidance for school states says that discrimination requirements under the Equality Act and inclusion measures should be dealt with under suitability. Can the Cabinet Secretary reassure members that the new guidance will give schools a clear understanding of their duty to support the rights of all pupils to safely access toilet facilities when conducting future suitability surveys?
Cabinet Secretary.
I think the national guidance goes some way to providing for that. And of course, we've had clear engagement with COSLA on this issue and with the trade unions who've been very helpful. I listened to some of the really helpful contributions from Andrea Bradley on Radio Scotland this morning. And of course, the EIS have been very outspoken in terms of their own views on this, and I welcome their contributions in that regard. They're very keen, of course, to provide support to their members, but they're also very keen to tell me about the impact that recent decisions have had in relation to schools in particular. So I've been clear that we had to update the guidance in line with the Supreme Court ruling. We've undertaken this work over a number of months to ensure that we are compliant with that, and of course the updated guidance published yesterday to that end.
Patrick Harvey.
Thank you. Though some members may not want to accept it, the people most directly affected by these changes are trans and non-binary young people themselves. The Cabinet Secretary refers to the guidance published, the document published by LGBT Youth Scotland some years ago. Can she tell us what input young trans and non-binary people and the organisations who work with them and represent them have had to these recent changes, either LGBT Youth Scotland, Thai Campaign, Scottish Trans or others? And if the answer is none, why not?
Minister Secretary.
I thank the member for his question. As I alluded to, I think in my response to Ms Gosel, the update to the guidance is technical in nature and responds directly to the Supreme Court ruling in that regard. However, I've set out in my previous answer, we will continue to engage with a range of organisations, including the ones that Mr Harvey has alluded to today. It's really important that the Government listens to the views of young people on these issues directly. And of course, we continue to fund LGBT Youth Scotland, and we also provide funding to the Thai Campaign to deliver work around inclusive education in our schools, which of course every party was able to vote for back in 2018. I think it is important that we remember the solidarity that existed previously on these issues, and I'll continue to work with the organisations Mr Harvey has alluded to, and particularly to listen to the voice of young people in all that I do as Education Secretary.
Alex Cole-Hamilton.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Whatever your point of view on these matters, I think everyone can recognise that it is harder to be trans in Scotland than it used to be. For many trans people, pupils, they will want to know that when they go to school, that they are clear on what is expected of them, that their anonymity, if they want it, will be protected, and that teachers and staff and other pupils are there to support them. For teachers, I've no doubt they'll want to know that the conversations and plans that this guidance suggests they carry out will be done so in the most sensitive manner possible. So can I ask the Cabinet Secretary, in that spirit, what further assistance and assurance can she provide trans pupils and teachers in terms of navigating these issues?
Cabinet Secretary.
I thank Mr Cole-Hamilton for his answer. I think in my response to Mr Harvey, I talked about some of the support that we provide in terms of funding to the Thai Campaign, but also to LGBT Youth Scotland. But I engage directly with our teaching trade unions, and I have engaged with them over the course of the past few months since the Supreme Court ruling on this issue in particular, and how it is impacting on staff in our schools in terms of their engagement. I will continue to have that engagement with our professional associations and to listen to views that they may have from their members around about how we might be able to strengthen that support and to look at further considerations in that regard. I think the member has raised a very important point.
Briefly, Sharon Dowie.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The Scottish Government's revised guidance for schools refers young people and families to charities like Mermaids and Time for Inclusive Education, Thai for Help. That is despite mermaids being criticised for giving young people chest binders without their parents' involvement and TIE providing schools with guidance that promotes gender ideology. I've been contacted by numerous parents concerned about gender ideology literature within schools. Does the Cabinet Secretary think it's appropriate to give such literature to primary children, and will she review the extent of this practice?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I think to Ms Dowie's question, the revised guidance remains clear that schools should support young people who are considering their gender identity. That is an individual's choice, but it's not for schools to influence or to determine a young person's choice, but it is to support them once it is established that a young person is considering changing their gender identity. But the guidance also talks about parental communication, which for me, as a former teacher, is hugely important in terms of that engagement and support that can be offered to young people through the whole school community, but also through home. So it's important that that approach is considered and that support is provided in the round. And the guidance provides for some detailed examples of how that might be undertaken. I see the member shaking her head at me, but I hope she does engage in the substantive points that are made in the guidance on that point.